Hi everyone, my name is Ann. You're watching Art on the Creek. We are in my home studio in Parker, Colorado, and what you're seeing now is probably nothing new to most of you. This is the Gansai Tambi set of Art Nouveau watercolors. Now, Gansai Tambi is made by Kuretake. They are beautiful watercolors that are made in the traditional Japanese method, which is why you see that great sheen on there. There's some shellac in here, which makes these so unique. Can you see how shiny they get on regular paper? It's just the shellac that gives it that nice reflective lacquered look, which is beautiful for that traditional Japanese style of painting. Here is what they look like on regular 100% cotton watercolor paper. I'm going to demo all of these today, plus do a speed paint of this painting that I did in these watercolors. So if you're ready, let's get started and let's check out these beautiful, beautiful paints. So what are the Gansai Tambi watercolors? Well, I'm sure many of you have seen many iterations of them. They're coming out with a lot of these custom palettes, and this one here is the one that they call their Art Nouveau, or this one in particular is a 24 color set too. The Japanese traditional paint is what this is billed as, is perfect for professional artists and crafters. It can be used as gouache and watered down and used like a watercolor. Ideal for sketch, illustration, card making, and more. And that is so true. These are really, truly lovely paints. They come in these full pans, which are just so generously sized. Let me take off the inner plastic here. First of all, you can see they're packaged in a cardboard box, which admittedly is not the most practical for you to use when you are traveling, but if you're going to use this as a studio set, that's fine. In the lid there, they have a little place where you can swatch, but it is just standard paper. You won't necessarily be able to use that more than just a color reference, but it would be accurate, so you could certainly use that. I have another set of the Gansai Tambi. I think I have the 48 set. In fact, I can put a link to that review up here in the corner where you can see where I initially reviewed these, and you can see a little bit more about them there also. But right here you can see these pans are really large. They're kind of more than a full-size pan. I haven't weighed them, but to me they're kind of like a pan and a half. That's the way I like to think about them anyway. In this set, I have been lately so intensely drawn to these muted pastels. The Derwent drawing pencils, this set, there's a new set of Castle Art pencils, their Harmonious set that focuses on this kind of a palette. And I have just been so thrilled and anxious to use these, partially because, number one, of their opaque nature. These are not going to be as transparent as your regular transparent watercolors. They're going to have a slight bit of opacity to them. And that is due partially to that shellac that I alluded to in the intro. I just want to point out real quickly here, this paper is just a little bit off-sized from exactly being the same size as the palette, but what I finally figured out, and you know what, this is like one of those moments when the light bulb goes off, and I figure I cannot be the only one who struggles through life like this, but it finally occurred to me to just line up the pans to the size boxes that I want to make. And then I'll be all set to make a swatch chart. So yeah, if you're not using a book that is a swatch diary that's pre-printed, it's not rocket science, but it took me a long time to figure that out. Just line up your paper to the size of your pans, and then you'll be able to for sure fit them all on there. I'm telling you guys, sometimes the nut falls off my tree and it's just lost. So I finally got this figured out and laid out for swatching. Now what I'm doing is just using a Sharpie here just to make things quick and easy, and I'm putting a black line in the middle of each box so that we can test the opacity. So this has a really nice color range, and I'll read the colors off here as this swatching is happening. First up, we have yellow. It is a saffron, actually. Next, green gold, followed by flax beige, ecru beige, pale pink, coral pink, potter's pink, vermilion, alizarin crimson, mauve, taupe or mauve taupe, however you want to say that, old mauve or old mauve. I found out that there is an English pronunciation and a British pronunciation. So it's a French word. Say it however you like. At the end of the row, it's grayish blue. And then there is cobalt turquoise, pale aqua, cobalt green, billiard green, shadow green, pea green, ivy green, green gray, beige gray, yellow brown, Mars yellow, and Venetian red is the final one here. Here comes the Mars yellow, and then here's Venetian red. So I have not found, for instance, on the cobalts here, I have not found that these colors granulate. What I have found, though, is that as watercolors, they do look really great in that sheer watery format. And I think you can see that here on these swatches, how we have that they're really kind of just slightly opaque. One thing I do want to mention, I did not pre-prep these pans. I didn't spray them with water. That's just not necessary with these. They re-wet so beautifully. And to my knowledge, they're not formulated with honey or anything like that. It's just that traditional Japanese Gansai Tambi formulation that really makes these just a joy to work with. So what I wanted to point out here by using just plain sketch paper is that these are wonderful if you are into journaling or using them for crafting of any kind, any card making, any kind of watercolor that you might want to do on paper that's not watercolor paper. Any kind of mixed media work. I have recently fallen in love again with journaling, and I like to take a prompt and write a little bit about it and then paint a picture on that page. I've just found that it really centers me. You know, for years and years I have taken many looks at art journaling and not really understood the purpose of it, but for some reason now in my 60th revolution around the planet, for some reason now it makes sense. And, you know, whenever something fits, I guess that's when you need to try it on and wear it. And that is exactly what's happening to me with my art. For instance, with this palette, I cannot tell you how much joy these colors bring me. And look how much they work on this black paper. This is just a very, very inexpensive sketchbook. This paper is nothing special at all. You would find it in a very typical art journal or bullet journal, I think. I just want to show you how wonderfully these paints do go on in that gouache-like fashion. Now, they're not gouache. They're not formulated like gouache. They don't dry matte. They do dry with somewhat of a sheen. So I'm going to try and keep this bit of the swatching at real time so that you guys can see just how differently they act when they're not on watercolor paper. And granted, the amount of pigment that I'm putting down is a little bit more viscous. It is a little bit thicker, but that's because the paints have already been passed through once with a paintbrush. So you can see that the colors also really hold true to their nature, with the exception of that second one up there, and that one is the green gold. It just doesn't show up that well on this black paper, but on white paper it would look very much its true nature. So I didn't swatch them on regular white paper. I just did on the watercolor paper and then on this here. So we'll have to go from these two little sample tests that I've given you. And again, that other video that I did, and that's I'll put a link to it in the description below as well in case you didn't click on it before and now you're interested. The review that I did on the regular Gansai Tambi, the initial set of 48, in those, I did explain how they are so easy to use on other papers. I did a test on dictionary paper, and I compared them to what we would call conventional watercolors, Western watercolor, to these. And I also did them on a journal paper. And what it does is there is so much less buckling. Something about the formulation of these paints and the vibrancy in the color is truly wonderful. There, I put a second layer on some of those ones that weren't showing up, and you can see they really do work just fine. So let me get these dry here, and then we'll take another look at them. One thing I did notice is it just took a little bit longer to dry. Now, when I did make this video, there was an awful lot of humidity in our weather, which is unusual for Colorado. We had a really damp period in June, but you can see how vibrant the colors are in the pans, even after they've been wet. No cracking, by the way. As soon as these dry, they heal back the way that they were when you first opened them. So here they are on the watercolor paper, using them as watercolor, fairly thin, And then here they are on the black sketch paper, and you can really see that sheen. It's just magical. And when you're using it on watercolor paper, you can achieve that sheen. But what it does is it shows up more in layers than it does readily as it did on the black paper here. So really unique, something fun to play with. Let's paint a picture and let's see how these work in practice. Here's the photo we're going to use for our painting today. It is from Unsplash, and I will put a link to that in the description for you. I chose this block of paper today for a couple of reasons. Number one, because of its size. It is one of the larger blocks that I have. And number two, because it's almost gone and I do want to try and use it up. I will put a link for those of you that are interested in the Cheap Joe's website. I'll put a link to that offers their papers. They've got just about everything on their website. They do a lot of in-house products. And this Kilimanjaro paper is really nice, you guys, and it's not as expensive as some of the other brands such as Arches or Fabriano, but it really performs on that level. I have found this particular one is from their Bright White, and it is a 300-pound, 640 GSM. This particular one measures 12 inches by 16 inches, so it is bigger. It's on the bigger side, but the blocks go as small as 4 inches by 6 inches, so there's really something for everyone. What I'm doing here is just a very typical watercolor technique. I've done some wet on wet, I've done some wet on dry, and right now I'm just seeing how these colors mix on the page, because that's really what I like to do. That's my favorite way to paint, is by putting that watercolor down and then putting another layer of pigment over it, another layer of watercolor over it, and letting the colors mix in that way. I much prefer that than mixing them in the palette. It's just a style choice that I have come to grow and love, mainly because I got tired of not mixing enough. I always had the habit of mixing too little. And what I did to change the way I paint, this is years and years ago when I was very first starting out, I was so frustrated that I couldn't get the right mix replicated again because I didn't mix enough the first time. And what I did instead that works better for me, this may or may not work better for you, but I would put down a very thin glaze of that first layer and then go over it with the other color that I want to mix it with, also in a thin glaze. And what that does is it lets those colors kind of reflect through one another back to your eyes, because watercolor has that transparent element to it. So we're able to see those colors mix on the paper really well. And in my mind anyway, it helps to hold the integrity of that initial color that you put down just a little bit better. Now, of course, that's not to say that I never mix on a palette or that this is the only way I paint. It's just my preferred method. And you can see here in some ways, I think I do have a little palette off camera there, and I do some mixing. What I wanted to do here, though, is to try and get the hair layered in nicely and have some different highlights in it. And the way that I chose to do that was to put the lightest color down first and then do the strands of hair in consecutively darker colors to try and add more shadow. At the end of the painting, you will see how fun that was, because what it did was it did help to bring out some of that sheen on her hair where I have more layers, which I thought was so interesting, because in some ways, if I were using a more conventional watercolor, that may have been an area that was overworked, but here that wasn't the case. Now this portion here is where I'm adding the shadow to her hat. You can see I got her back wet, and then I went in with some of that old mauve, and then I went over it with some of that grayish blue to create that shadow. I wanted to keep the shadow temperature very, very cool, and the left side of her hat more warm in texture. So, or excuse me, in temperature. So let's see how I came up with that. Let's see if my plan worked out. It was terrifying to get her back wet and put the darker colors over that, because I really liked the way that the skin was working. And then to go in and put that dark layer over it was terrifying. But you can see what I mean here. You can still see the skin color through that shadow, which is exactly the way that appears in life. When we have a shadow, unless it's really dark and really intense, we can still see the colors of whatever it is that shadow is casting itself on. So I wanted to be able to try and replicate that. Now, I will be the first to admit that I'm really not crazy about the background here, because I kind of wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Wasn't sure where I wanted to put her in the scene, and I didn't decide until the very last minute that putting her on this sort of a beach scene made sense, and that I can do the sky and the sand in this certain way. It's a little bit streaky the way that came out, but that is on me. That's the way that I painted it, and it was because I was still planning what I was going to do as I was painting. So do as I say, not as I do. When you're painting a sky, it works best if you get it all wet first. So you work wet into wet, and tip your paper up. Let the paint drain down a little bit. Let that migration of the gravity help you, and then you won't have these inconsistencies in value. But you know what? It's okay. This was more just a practice to see what I could come up with these paints. And for me, for my purpose, I really like the way she came out, and I will probably hang her up. As far as light fastness goes, I do believe that in that box lid there, that it explains that there is some light fastness properties to these, and I think these can definitely be considered as professional paints. I certainly enjoyed using them. I had a lot of fun really adding the detail, and that is something that I like a little bit. I don't like a lot, but I like a little bit of detail when I'm painting. I like to let my brush strokes really convey the most of the message, and that's kind of what's happening here. To me, this is detail. What I'm doing is just kind of putting a blobby, stipply pattern on the hat, but the message that it conveys, I think anyway, is that it's a straw hat. So, you know, our brains, we know so much in our lives from what we see. We know what straw hats look like. We know that there are that straw color and that they have that interesting pattern-like texture. So maybe that's enough. Maybe we don't need to go in and draw every single little diamond of the straw pattern. So that's kind of what I'm going for here when I'm painting this hat. I'm not going for full, complete photorealism. I'm just going for suggestion of detail to let the viewer conclude the story. And as all things go in watercolor and other art media, as soon as you complete one area, you will find that another area needs a little more attention. I found that after I had finished her hair and got all of the details in the hat that I wanted, that the rest of her skin was really looking pretty pale. So I decided to punch that up a little bit, and now I thought that the best way for me to add the light coming through her hat would be to, number one, add some highlights up here on the hat, and then replicate those on her back in a very similar way. Not the exact pattern, but a similar pattern. And I'm using a bleed-proof white. This particular one I think is by Jacquard. I have used the one by P.H. Martin and the one by De La Rowney. I have found the one by De La Rowney lasted me a little bit longer. However, recently I opened it and it looked really grainy and sandy, so I don't really know what happened there. So right now I'm using this one and I'm liking it and it's working. One thing on the hat, I wanted you to notice that I mixed some of that bleed-proof white with this Gansai Tambi watercolor. These will mix with any other water-based media that you want to mix it with. The one thing that I will greatly caution you against is because they have shellac in them, do not liquidate them and then put them in a fountain pen. You may use them with dip pens, that would be fine, but don't put them in a fountain pen because that shellac will dry in there and it'll gum up your pen. But other than that, I think that this particular set is just a beautiful addition to any art supply collection that you may have, and I hope that you would consider giving them a try. Check out the other video that I have, it'll be linked in the description. And if you are interested in a full-time tutorial of this particular painting, let me know in the comments and I can put it up again in real time. Okay guys, thank you so much. I hope everyone is enjoying their World Watercolor Month. Maybe you're enjoying time on the beach like this sweet little girl. And I hope you're having a wonderful art-filled week. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye now.